This time I want to introduce a new format for my video essays. I want to comment on things that came up in the course of the past several days or the past couple of weeks in my online discussions. Topics that came up and which I think deserve comment, deserve a more articulate reply. The first topic I'd like to comment on was inspired by an email from a reader, John Brown. Thanks, John, by the way, for that very kind email you sent me. John told me that in some discussions people were arguing whether my articulation of idealism didn't implicitly assume a form of dualism. Well, it doesn't, but I think I do understand why people might suspect that it does. The argument might go along the following lines. Bernardo rejects the world outside mind of materialists, but he replaces it with a collective unconscious, which is also fundamentally different from consciousness. And it is that collective unconscious that generates consensus reality. So it's just a play of words, one might say. I'm just replacing the outside reality of materialism by the mysterious collective unconscious. Well, that argument would be wrong. As I articulate at length in my book, Why Materialism is Baloney, I think in chapter 5, in my view, the unconscious, both the personal and the collective unconscious, isn't unconscious at all. I keep on using the word unconscious because it is the traditional word that depth psychology has been using for it since the time of William James, Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung over 100 years ago. I just didn't want to introduce new terminology. But perhaps I should have done so. Perhaps I should have used the expression the obfuscated segment of consciousness instead of the unconscious. Because in my mind, the unconscious is exactly that. It is simply an obfuscated part of consciousness. The contents of the unconscious are in consciousness. We are conscious of them. But they are obfuscated. We simply do not know that we are conscious of them. Let me give you an example. To illustrate what I'm saying. Since you began watching this video, you have been conscious of your breathing, of the air flowing in and out of your nostrils, inflating your lungs, the movements of your diaphragm, but you have not been conscious that you were conscious of your breathing. Your breathing was a content of your consciousness that was obfuscated by other contents of your consciousness, namely my words, my image, this video that you've been watching. I think all contents of the unconscious, both personal and collective, are like your breathing until a few seconds ago. They are in consciousness, but we do not know that we are conscious of them, because there is one field, one small field within the broad array of consciousness, namely the ego, that amplifies mental contents through self-reflection. These are mental contents that not only we are conscious of, but we are conscious that we are conscious, that we are conscious, etc. of. This self-reflection amplifies these mental contents and obfuscates everything else, like the glare of the sun at noon obfuscates the stars. The stars are all still there at noon. Their photons are still hitting your retina at noon. Technically, you're still seeing them, but you do not know that you're seeing them because they are obfuscated by the much stronger glare of the sun. So in conclusion, when I appeal to a unconscious to explain the emergence of consensus reality, I am not implicitly postulating a form of dualism at all. All I'm saying is that there are contents of consciousness that because of self-reflective amplification, we know that we know, namely the contents of your ego, this video right now, for instance, and there are much more or many more contents of consciousness that become obfuscated by the egoic glare. Therefore, we are not aware that we are aware of them. We are not aware that we know them, that we are conscious of them, but they are still in consciousness. There is no fundamental difference. There is only a relative difference in the degree of amplification. This point is a crucial point in my entire philosophy. It's a point I elaborate on extensively in the book. I'm also adding a link to the description of this video, which points to an article at the Science and Non-Duality website, which is an excerpt from the book where I discuss this. And I concur that without this articulation of how the unconscious is actually conscious, there would indeed be a form of dualism in my philosophy. I could even be accused correctly by materialists, if it were not for this articulation, that I'm just creating a different kind of hard problem. Instead of the traditional hard problem of consciousness, which is how do you explain how qualia, how subjective qualities emerge from matter, I would have a different kind of hard problem, which is how can a conscious mind emerge from a fundamentally unconscious mind. These would all be fair criticisms without the articulation that I just explained. There is no hard problem in my formulation of idealism because there is no unconscious. There are only obfuscated contents of consciousness that become obfuscated by the glare of egoic awareness, self-reflective egoic awareness. The other subject that I think is worth to comment on was a message posted on my Facebook page by reader Adam Smith. And he had an interesting thought that he posted to my page. He was trying to explain the notion of this one mind underlying all nature. And he used an analogy of a network of computers. And the rhetorical question he asked was, if all these computers are networked and communicating together, can we speak of multiple computers, or should we speak of only one computer, which is, in other words, the network itself? I thought it was interesting, but my reply to him was this. What is the problem that we need to explain here? Do we need to explain the emergence of one mind from multiple separate minds? That is the problem he's trying to elucidate with the metaphor. Or do we need instead to explain how multiple separate minds apparently split off from the one mind? Which is the one we need to explain? Note that the first problem, the emergence of one mind from multiple minds, is the problem of panpsychism, the notion that all matter is conscious. You have to explain how this unified human consciousness apparently emerges from the separate consciousnesses of our neurons or even of the molecules in our brains. I don't think that's a problem that needs explaining, because I think it is incorrect to say that mind emerges from lower minds or higher minds emerge from lower minds. That is a projection of the materialist/realist philosophical system. If we start from the primary datum of reality, the primary datum of existence, it makes no sense to try to explain how mind emerges from anything else, even if this something else are lower minds, so to say. Because we start from mind. Mind is the fundamental datum. What we have to explain is, if mind is the fundamental datum, it is the one irreducible property of nature. If all nature unfolds within the field of this one mind, which is the most parsimonious, most self-evident starting point for any philosophy, in my view, how do we explain the emergence of these apparent separate minds, like my mind, your neighbor's mind? How is it possible that these minds become apparently separated, disconnected, dissociated, to use the psychological term? That is what we need to explain. And to bring it back to Adam's analogy, I think what we need to elucidate here is how separate threads, computer processes in the CPU of the one computer behind all nature, how these separate threads emerge. They're all running in the same computer. There are no separate computers. There is no network of computers. It is only one computer, only one mind. But these separate threads in a multi-threaded environment, so to say, seem to emerge. That's what we need to explain, how these apparently separate threads lose self-reflective awareness of everything else that is going on in the one mind behind our nature. And then again, what I just explained in the previous section in this video comes into play again. It is the glare of the contents of individual egos, individual localizations of mind that obfuscate everything else and create the illusion of separateness, create the illusion of multiple minds, like threads running in parallel in the same CPU. Another topic worth commenting was inspired by a post on my discussion forum by Peter Jones. Again, thanks Peter for that post. And it is a recurring topic, which is it correct for me to call my philosophical position idealism instead of a non-dual approach in which mind and matter are codependent, or any other name, any other ism, or some other approach, some other label? Ultimately, it comes down to words. I try to make clear what my position is by elucidating it, by explaining it, regardless of the label that I chose to adopt. I did choose idealism because of the long philosophical position behind it, for one. Another reason is to more directly oppose this invented reality outside subjectivity that has been abstracted, created artificially by realists/materialists. I wanted to very directly negate that, oppose that, and choosing the label idealism plays a role in that. I wanted to emphasize the primary datum of existence, which is qualia, it's subjectivity itself, subjective experience. Now, I get into trouble, as I think most people get when they are discussing these topics, with the use of words. There are many people, for instance, in non-duality circles that use the word mind in the sense of thoughts, not in the sense of the space of subjective experience itself. This happens a lot with non-duality teachers. They say, oh, your mind is what gives you trouble, meaning your thoughts, your concepts, your abstractions about reality, your models, your views, your beliefs, and so on. That's not what traditionally in philosophy has been called mind. Mind traditionally is the space of subjective experience itself, which includes thoughts, but also emotions, also feelings, visions, dreams, all of that. Our perceptions of the world around us, the qualia of experience, these are all in mind. That's the traditional term of the word, and in that context, I use the word mind as well. I do it with reservation, though, the use of the word mind, the use of the ism, the term idealism, because you see, if all nature is a phenomenon of consciousness, which again I use interchangeably with the word mind. Mind and consciousness are interchangeable in the way I use the words. If all nature is a phenomenon of consciousness, in consciousness, if all is in consciousness, if all is in mind, the words consciousness and mind are useless because they are simply what is. All is mind. All is consciousness. We don't need a word. It doesn't identify a discernible subset of reality. And if you take out those words, you have to take out idealism with it, because idealism is the philosophy that all is in mind. But mind is simply what is. So what are we talking about? The essence is that we are denying a reality outside mind. We are denying this inflationary doubling of reality that materialists require, by assuming that not only is there mind, not only is there qualia, your subjective experience of the world, which is undeniable because it's the primary datum of existence, next to that, there is also an entire universe outside mind, which indirectly modulates your subjective experiences and generates it in a way. We are denying that. It is that denial that is the essence of my philosophical position. Much more than to say, for instance, that thoughts are more real than perceptions. I'm not saying that at all. For me, thoughts, perceptions, emotions, abstractions, they are all contents of mind. They are phenomena of mind in mind, or phenomena of consciousness in consciousness. As I explained earlier in this video, even the unconscious, the so-called unconscious, is a phenomenon of consciousness in consciousness. It is simply obfuscated. Let's not get distracted by labels, by terms, by words. The essence of the message is what matters here. But of course, the moment I deny that postulated world outside mind, I need to be able to explain how empirical reality can be made sense of without such postulate. You know, materialists think they need this world outside mind to explain what we perceive, to explain the fact that we seem to share the same world, to explain the fact that the laws of nature don't seem to care about our volition, they just go on according to very strict patterns and regularities. They say that they require that postulate in order to make, in order to make sense of empirical reality. So if I eliminate that postulate, if I deny it, I need to make sense of empirical reality in another way. And that is the main thrust of my work, to explain how we can make sense of the world, how we can make sense of scientific observations, how we can make sense of ordinary life and our interactions with other people and the universe, how we can make sense of all that without needing to postulate this entire universe fundamentally outside mind. That's what I try to do in most of the pages of my books, in most of my articles, is trying to make sense of that. But the key point is to deny a reality fundamentally outside the only carrier of reality anyone can ever know, which is subjective experience itself. The last point I would like to address in this video essay is the big question of meaning. In recent interviews and recent comments, my philosophy has been often compared to what Advaita, neo-advaita, non-duality teachers describe. This idea that all reality is fundamentally subjective, that there is no objective world, that it is all just one mind, and all reality unfolds in that one mind. It's the non-duality approach to spirituality that has been growing in popularity. And it's an approach which I respect, by the way. But I do have some points I think are fair to criticize in that approach. Maybe these are not fundamental points, maybe these are mostly misunderstandings of the people who follow that approach. But if it is a misunderstanding, it's widespread enough that it awards some commentary, I think. And what I see as a misunderstanding is this notion that because all reality unfolds in mind, and it's not objective, it's not fundamentally outside subjective experience, then it is a kind of illusion. And the next step in this very dangerous line of thinking is that, but if it is an illusion, then it is meaningless. It is unimportant what we do with our lives. It's unimportant what happens in our lives and how we face the world and how we relate to other people, because it is all just a dream anyway. It is all just an illusion. That's where I think it goes wrong, and I elaborate on this a bit at the end of my book, Why Materialism is Baloney, and I plan to elaborate much more on this in future works. I see this in the following way. Let's make an analogy. When you dream at night, for instance, you may dream that you're falling off a building, and then you wake up when you're about to hit the ground, and you wake up scared and sweating. You immediately realize that your dream was an illusion, in the sense that you were not really falling. You're not really about to hit the ground. You're not really going to die. Those were images in your dreaming mind, and in that sense they were an illusion. But there is truth in that illusion. The illusion says something true about your state of mind. Most depth psychologists use dreams as primary datum to get insight into the psyche of the patient, because dreams convey valid information. In the example I just named, maybe you have some hidden anxieties, some hidden insecurities that are manifesting themselves in your dream through the imagery of you falling off a building and about to hit the ground. Maybe you feel that you're not in control of your life, that you're in free fall, and that there is danger ahead, mortal danger. So you see, this truth about your psychic state is embedded in the dream in a metaphorical way. The dream itself, despite being an illusion, conveys relevant, important information about the dreamer. Now let's take this to reality. Even if reality is entirely in mind, and in that sense it is, quote, an illusion, the illusion may be the only way the underlying truth of nature manifests itself. Maybe truth can only manifest itself through the illusions it generates. Maybe the illusions are the only valid source, the only valid signal for us to gain insight into what this mind is. For the same reason that the eye that sees cannot see itself without a mirror, the mind that underlies nature cannot know itself directly. It can only know itself through its behavior, which it itself experiences. That behavior is a metaphor for the fundamental underlying nature of mind. And in that sense, there is a lot of meaning for us to live this illusion we call life in a very intense, engaged way, and pay attention to it, because it is revealing crucial information about who or what we really are, and it may be the only source of that information. To say that something is just an illusion does not mean that it is unimportant or meaningless, and I think that is a critically dangerous misinterpretation of Advaita non-duality philosophy, one that we should be very careful if we feel sympathy for Advaita, as I do, for one.